Hello and welcome. This is Lights Out, and away we go with the episode. With the Formula 1 podcast for fans and by fans. I'm Will, and as I look across the digital garage, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, or should I say my co-driver, Sam. Hello, Sam. How are you?
Forza Luigi! Forza Ferrari! I'm great. Yeah, not too bad, thank you, mate. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. As you can probably tell, it's a big day for us here. And we've hit the klaxon, we've hit the glass, we've pulled out the emergency podcast measures. We are back sooner than we expected. We were planning to be back for our first episode of 2024 next Tuesday, but we've made the decision to go now because it is such mega news, and we've assembled just like the Avengers. And I think the 1st of February 2024 will go down in Formula 1 history. It's the day that news of Lewis Hamilton's move to Ferrari was confirmed. It started the night before with Will Buxton, the dramatic journalist chap that you've seen on Drive to Survive, tweeting that there would be a big announcement coming soon, and he said it was going to be huge. I don't think either of us thought when we first saw that we would think anything to do with Lewis. And since this morning, the 1st of February, transfer deadline day in football world, the Formula 1 world has been rocked by Lewis's move to Ferrari. You know, the greatest and oldest Formula 1 team in the sport, with the 7-time world champion. It is an absolutely mouth-watering prospect, and we felt we had to jump on and do an emergency podcast because it is such big news. It's completely seismic. You know, recording this at 8 p.m. and my brain has still not processed it from when I read it on the train 12 hours ago. It is that mega. So, Sam, what is your initial reaction to this mega news?
Pure excitement, actually, I think. Yeah, I think we. So, do you remember we did a Lewis Hamilton special episode last year, and we talked quite a few times, didn't we? Particularly, was it around Monaco time that he was being quite heavily linked with Ferrari, and there have been a load of discussions apparently. And Charles Leclerc got that funny question, didn't he, in the press conference the day after all of the rumours broke. About what his perfect teammate would be, and Lewis was sat right next to him, and Charles sort of leaned over and went, "Hi, Lewis," like sort of in a nod with a nod to all of the rumours and stuff. So we've sort of discussed the prospect of it, but it never felt like a reality, right? Lewis shut it down every time, Mercedes shut it down, and obviously signed a new deal. So I think everybody sort of put that dream to bed, I suppose, to some extent. So yeah, it's very much come out of left field. I think it's a really seismic move. It's by far the biggest, for my money anyway, the biggest sort of driver transfer or driver move ever in the sport, probably since the last time he moved from McLaren. And yeah, just I'm really excited. I'm buzzing for 2025 already. I know we have a whole season. We have a whole season of podcasts to do as well, of course, which we're looking forward to. But yeah, I can't wait to see Lewis in a Ferrari. And I also can't wait to see Lewis in a Ferrari with Charles Leclerc. Like, they are two of my prized favourite drivers on the grid, so to see them together driving in the Scarlet, I can't wait. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely huge. It's probably the biggest shock sort of in sort of driver transfer since Hamilton sort of moved out of nowhere to move from McLaren to Mercedes, who weren't doing very well at the time. And you could always trust Lewis to spring a surprise and catch people out. On the sort of big moves, or what's it like? You and I were exchanging a few ideas earlier of what the equivalent like, and in sort of in footballing terms, you came up with quite a good one about Figo when he moved from Barcelona to Real Madrid, sort of moving from one rival to another, and how seismic that was. But also, I was thinking, the scale and the impact it had, sort of when Ronaldo was returning to United, that felt like a major event, or when Messi was leaving Barcelona. And if you're not a footballing fan, I was talking about it to my partner earlier, and she made the comparison. She's like, it'd be like when Jerry Halliwell left the Spice Girls, but rather than just leaving the Spice Girls, she decides to go and join Destiny's Child, whilst the Spice Girls still have one more album to record. Like, it's that sort of scale. It's hard to compare the scale of what it is of a legend like Lewis moving from Mercedes, a team he's been so incredibly successful with, to Ferrari, the most historic, special team in Formula 1.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, the only other one I could think of was in a sort of similar stratosphere, I suppose, would be somebody like Michael Jordan moving when he was at Chicago. That kind of Because he is iconic. Yeah, he is by far the biggest name in the sport. Some would say he's probably bigger than the sport, which brings its problems for him, definitely. But yeah, it's absolutely mega. And kind of, I don't want to say it was necessary for the sport, but it felt like after, because we had quite, I mean, we plan to talk about this next week, but a lot of contract extensions for existing drivers and team lineups looked like they were going to be pretty static for the next year or two. Certainly the bigger teams. Max isn't going anywhere. Charlotte signed a new deal with Ferrari, of course. There were lots of discussions about signing a new deal. I wonder what he's feeling right now. And Lando signing a new deal with McLaren as well. So a lot of the kind of top talent in the sport looked like they were going to stay exactly where they were. So it looked to me like the driving lineups were going to be a bit static, even with the prospect of a big silly season this summer. So yeah, I think it's kind of exciting for the sport. I think it is interesting timing, isn't it? Because you don't normally get this like right before a season. You've now got a driver driving for a team he knows he's leaving for a whole year.
I think that's one of the reasons why there's such a big shock factor, is because we were not expecting driver transfers for this next season before this current season even started. Like, it's the timing, I think, that has caused such a big shock. If this had come in the middle of the summer, I think it still would have been huge, but it's caught a lot of people by surprise.
Yeah, and obviously he's not even sat in the W15 yet, probably. So yeah, a lot of drivers tend to make these moves after they've had a chance to suss out whether their current team are up to it or moving in the direction that they want. And I think as well, probably from a Ferrari perspective, they probably said to Lewis, "This is it, really. Like, if you ever want to drive for Ferrari, now's the time. Because if you don't, Sainz will sign to a new deal, lock him in for another couple of years, and that'll be it. You know, Lewis will finish at Mercedes in the next 2 to 3 years and retire." So probably, I say, not with any guarantees, given Alonso's still going, but yeah, I think they probably did give him that option, I suppose, and just said that if you want to drive Ferrari, now's the time. And it's kind of a perfect match, isn't it? I mean, I know, for Mercedes has been synonymous with Hamilton and vice versa for a long, long time now. But they are the two biggest brands in the sport, I think, Ferrari and Hamilton. Putting those two things together is really exciting. And yeah, they are an iconic team. Everybody's, I say everybody, not everybody's desperate to see Ferrari back at the top, but a lot of us are. And I think their chances have only been improved by signing who you and I agree is the best driver of all time, and really has a well-established track record of improving teams, particularly, and improving cars. So
yeah, definitely. And also he's been at the right place at the right time and ended up winning championships. So this could be an inspired choice. I think what we'll cover off, we've got a few questions to cover from the first half, and then in the second half we'll talk about how on earth Mercedes replace a 7-time, I almost said 8-time world champion. He should be an 8-time.
You can.
A 7-time world champion. So I think let's dig a bit deeper into why do we think he's moving? I mean, my first sort of question to you, Sam, is do you think it's the last 2 years and maybe the current direction of Mercedes? Do you think that's a sort of lacking confidence? He's voted with his feet. Do you think that's why he's pulled the trigger, or do you think that's a factor?
I think it's definitely a factor. Whether it's the most important one, I'm less sure, because I know we probably shouldn't, but I did sort of take him at his word last year when he signed his new deal and said, "Look, I want to win the 8th with Mercedes. I feel like we're moving in the right direction. I'm being listened to. Car development's changing for 2024, and we'll find out in 13 days what that looks like, probably." But with all of that being said, it must have been hard the last couple of years driving, in the first instance, a car that was actively trying to break his back, and in the second instance, driving a car that was incredibly unpredictable, hauling it up the grid to finish sort of third in the championship behind the two Red Bulls, when everybody agrees there's no way that Mercedes was the second quickest car for any of the season, really. I think, yeah, it's definitely a factor, but for my money, I think Ferrari, it's more about Ferrari than it is about Mercedes. And I think that's probably why Toto and Mercedes will deal with it quite well. I think if they felt like Lewis had just decided he didn't have any faith in Mercedes anymore, it would be slightly different. But I think Lewis has always been quite open about his affection for Ferrari. He's obviously really good friends with Sebastian Vettel, who made a similar move not too long ago now, and drove for Ferrari. And yeah, I think everybody would have known that, like, if it was going to happen, it's going to happen sort of nowish. And he's obviously made that decision and wants to go and drive for the Tifosi.
But just on that, if Mercedes had 2 really successful years instead of the years they've currently had, do you think he would even consider leaving, or do you think it's kind of it's added to the reason? You know, there's an attraction to Ferrari, but also Mercedes haven't really given much of a reason to stay.
No, I agree. If he'd won another couple and he was on 9, chasing a 10th world title, fine. You know, maybe you would stay at the team you've been at all this time and try and win the 10th. I think Lewis, he still obviously has that drive to win. He still obviously has that drive to win championships. I don't know what Ferrari have said to him about their plans for the next couple of years and also for the new regs in 2026. Maybe he's been convinced by that prospect and thinks he's going to win another championship there. That's quite possible. And in fact, it's probably quite likely, not knowing Lewis, but knowing his drive to win. But equally, driving Ferrari is special, regardless of whether or not they win championships. And, fingers crossed he goes there and wins races at least, because it would be a real shame if he moved to Ferrari and suffered in a really rubbish car for a couple of years. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But I think it's more about the prestige, and every great driver at some point has wanted to or has gone on to drive for Ferrari, and he's joining a pretty exclusive club there. Yeah. I think it's more about that than necessarily being a massive downer on Mercedes. This season will probably answer that question, won't it? I mean, if they really struggle again this year, everybody's going to be looking at Lewis saying, "Yep, good call, my friend."
Yeah,
we'll see.
I mean, you're on the Ferrari point. I think it's a really sort of romantic ending to his Formula One career, really, to start at the team where he grew up and they took him as a kid, to then move to, make an inspired call to move to Mercedes, a massive manufacturer, and then go to the most historic team in the sport. It's, I think someone put it very well. It's the biggest dangling carrot in Formula One. So it's very, very hard to turn down, I think. And, there's always been flirting with it in the past. I suppose also a key thing, a reason why he's probably attracted to Ferrari now, is that Fred Vasseur, the team principal of Ferrari, is someone that Lewis knows incredibly well. He was his team principal when Lewis was in GP2 or FP2 when he was world champion there. So that's obviously been a factor in wooing him as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That will have been a factor. He's got quite a good relationship with the head of Ferrari as well, sort of off the track. And there's another guy who moved over from Mercedes. They poached Loic Serra. I don't know if you know him. He's he was the head of vehicle performance at Mercedes, and the rumor is that he's also sort of very much been in Lewis's camp with regards to car development. Like he agreed that sort of the W13 and W14 both had traits that just weren't conducive to lap time and Lewis's driving style. So it's kind of interesting that Mercedes had him poached off of them relatively recently, and now they've lost Lewis as well. So I think he must have been convinced definitely by the team that they've got. Ferrari have been recruiting really talented people quite a lot the last 18 months, 2 years. They've pinched a couple from Red Bull as well. So yes, I think he's walking into an ideal environment, and also don't underestimate the relationship he's got with Charles Leclerc. Like they have always seemed to get on really well, and I think they're kind of kindred spirits. They're both quite quiet, very chilled individuals. I think they're both obviously highly competitive racing drivers, but I think there's a similarity of approach to some extent.
You can see him doing quite well in the Ferrari, because to design it to how he would like it, it's not too far away from his current style. Whereas, if he was going to work in the Red Bull tomorrow, he'd find that really difficult, because it's the complete opposite style to how he likes to drive a car.
Yep.
So I think that's a good point as well. Like you say, it's not like he's going into being Verstappen's teammate. I think him and Leclerc is, it's a mouth-watering prospect. We can come on to that in a bit later as well. I suppose one of the other reasons why Lewis is going, he doesn't need the money. He's free to make that choice. He's got enough money for the rest of his lifetime. Basically, he can, at this point in his career, at the age of 39, he can take a risk. He can take a gamble. If you're going to take a gamble, go to the best, most historic team. Don't, it's not like he's taking a gamble on Aston Martin. I think it's a really, it's probably felt like it's now or never. And like you say, I think Ferrari have probably said that to him as well. Like, come on, now let's make it happen. We've always meant to be together, and it's fascinating. You touched on it there a minute ago about what does this mean for 2024. I mean, that car launch on the 14th of February with Lewis and Mercedes, that's going to be horrendous.
Awkward.
It's going to be so awkward. It's going to be like announcing spending Valentine's Day with your ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend publicly in front of everyone. Like it's going to be such a story. And I think you're right. I think Mercedes and Toto Wolff aren't idiots. I don't think they'll come across as really sour grapes. I think they'll respect that it's Lewis's call. He had that option in his contract to leave, and he's exercised it. So I think they'll be mature about it. But it's still not going to be a smooth car launch, is it? Really, because that is going to be the topic of conversation. Is the W15 a mess, and is this the reason why Lewis is leaving? That's going to be the main thing on everyone's lips at that car launch, isn't it?
Yeah, but yes, it will. But also, so I mean, what are Mercedes' expectations really? I mean, we're going to talk a bit about this in future podcasts, aren't we? And sort of what we expect from them this season and what they expect from themselves. But essentially, they're in it to build a championship-winning car and win world championships. So, from Lewis's perspective, this season goes one of two ways: either he has a great last hurrah with Mercedes, wins the 8th, rides off into the sunset, kind of Ferrari-shaped sunset, and goes and does something he's always dreamt of doing, having sort of fulfilled the expectations of Mercedes this season. And on the other hand, if he doesn't win the championship, largely he can probably consider the season a bit of a failure, and maybe the car wasn't up to scratch, and he suddenly looks like, obviously we'll see how Ferrari perform as well this season. Looks like maybe it could be a good decision from a performance perspective too. So it's sort of win. I don't want to say win-win, but it feels a little bit win-win for Lewis. I mean, it may well be awkward at points for sure, and car development and setup's going to be really interesting this year. I mean, Toto is so competitive. I can't see a situation in which they would actively make it more difficult for Lewis to win races by favouring George, because Lewis probably is by far and away their best chance at winning a championship this year. But if it looks like the car isn't going to be a championship contender and either Red Bull run off into the distance or it's going to be a Red Bull Ferrari battle this season, fingers crossed it's not Red Bull run off into the distance, of course, it may well be they start thinking about George as the number one driver next year, and that changing things from a development perspective, and that potentially not favouring Lewis. I don't know. All of those are sort of up in the air factors to some extent, but I think from Lewis's perspective, having endured the last couple of years as he has, maybe he's not too bothered about that prospect. Like if he wins the 8th, great. If not, as I say, he's got Ferrari to look forward to in 25.
Yeah. I mean, I am a Lewis mega fan, but I do think it's going to be something incredibly unexpected for him to be the world champion this season, just where Red Bull ended the season last year. I think, for Lewis, I think a good end or good send off for his time at Mercedes this season is just winning a race. I think he's not had that for 2 years, and he's had, like you said, he's had so many awful races over the last 2 years. The Baku with his back, or Brazil where he was just being lapped, or Austin where he thought he was going to win and then got disqualified, or even Abu Dhabi at the end of the season where he finished, I think it was 9th, where George was on the podium. Like, he's had some miserable times, and I think if he can have a season where he doesn't replicate that, I think he'll be happy. And if he's challenging for the odd win here or there and he does get a win, I think he'll be quite happy. I suppose one of the things that will be interesting, I think that's a good point about development, is if this car is not very good, any public comment by him negatively about the car is going to be so scrutinized and to be so hyped up. And I think he's going to have to be very careful about what he says about the car, because the level of scrutiny now with him leaving is added, I think, really. Whereas, it's obviously been a big story in the past, but I think it could be even bigger this season if he starts complaining about the car.
Yeah, no, you're right. He will have to be very careful about that. I'm sure Mercedes will have some very clear instructions in place for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if it got messy between the two of them, if they were sort of slagging each other off publicly. There's too much respect from Toto and also from Lewis as well. It's not really either of their style. I can't see them burning the bridge with each other. I think that would be quite bizarre, I think.
Yeah, of course. And also, I feel like Lewis is going to be in this, maybe he won't be driving for more than the next 3 or 4 years probably, but he'll likely be around the sport still for a long time yet. And ex-drivers bring an awful lot of value still to teams and things. Yeah. So it's quite possible he ends up going back to Mercedes in some form or another at some stage. So
yeah. I mean, it will be hard for that Mercedes team though, getting ready for this new season, about to launch the car, and your star man has just quit before the season's even started. Well, is leaving next season before the season started. Like, that's going to take one hell of a motivational speech from Toto Wolff and the leadership team to get everyone fired up, because for them, they probably feel like it's, what's the point? Or, especially if that test doesn't go very well at the start of the season, I think the morale could be quite low, because it's such a shock and it's such a big loss to lose a 7-time world champion.
Yeah, it is. And I think for the next sort of 2 to 3 years, it does potentially present a bit of a problem for Mercedes, because I think Lewis really overperformed last year.
Yeah, definitely.
and he sort of hid a lot of the issues by being so good and so consistent. I think he had what, like 15 consecutive points finishes or something mad. Like really, really strong and lots of podiums and stuff. And as I say, finished third in the championship when he really probably shouldn't have done. And you look at the lineups for now for 2025. Obviously, Red Bull have got Max Verstappen. Ferrari are going to have two really fantastic like championship contender drivers in Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, which we're obviously very excited about. Mercedes are going to retain George Russell, who we both agree is a really good driver, but is he championship challenger potential yet?
No.
Probably not. And then you look at McLaren, who've got both drivers signed up long term now. Lando and Oscar Piastri are both fantastic. I think they're definitely in the same league as George Russell, maybe ahead potentially. I don't know. In Lando's case, we'll see. And yeah, that presents a pretty challenging environment for Mercedes because there aren't natural replacements really for Lewis. You can't replace someone like that. There are options, of course. They could take Sainz, they could take a number of other drivers, but they're not Lewis, and they're not in the Lewis, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen bracket. And that's what they want and need because they're Mercedes, right? They're a winning machine. They need the best driver.
I think added to that as well, you're not like Lewis has covered a lot of the problems, and that's been to the team's benefit because they've outperformed and they've scored loads of points. But let's say the W15 is not a good car and they've got issues with the car, and then the W16 is the same, the W17 is car, and you've got two drivers that aren't at that level. There is a reality where in 3 or 4 years' time, Mercedes are not a winning team. They're just a midfield team because they're really struggling to get their head around the regulations, or they're just, they're struggling to be at the very front, but after such a period of dominance. I think it's it could very likely happen that they become sort of in that pack behind those at the very top. And you can see Red Bull and Ferrari, maybe McLaren, just being the top three teams for years to come. I think it's kind of a bit of a make or break moment where Mercedes go over the next 2 years. And I think, Toto, he's just signed a new deal. He'll be absolutely gutted because he said so publicly he was there to get Lewis his 8th World Championship rightly. And now he's just lost his star man. And, penny for his thoughts this evening. I feel like he must be pretty... he must have smashed a few Bose headphones on his desk or whatever.
A very expensive habit to have, that one. They're quite spendy, those headphones, aren't they?
They are. I mean, it's still an iconic moment. But, for my money, Toto seems like an inspiring chap. Like, I'd love to be in his company right now because I think it'd be fascinating to see how he responds in his reactions and how he's, decisions he's making with the shareholders, those around him, the leadership team, and how he manages the staff, I think, as well. I think he'll be one to watch, I think, over the next year or so, how he handles the pressure of finding a new star and sort of getting Mercedes back to winning world championships. And I think that job it's just been made incredibly harder by his star man going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I would say is it's an enormous opportunity for George Russell now. He'll be number one in that team. He is very well respected, well regarded on the grid. He's a quick driver. He's just got to make that step now. But the step from good driver to great driver challenging for a world championship is the hardest one.
Yeah, this season is George's most important season at Mercedes of his 3 so far because he's got to show that he's stepped up another level. He's consistent. He's not error prone, and he's not someone that takes his team out. That we started to see that a bit from him towards the end, and he was making quite a few mistakes. And I hope he's had the off season he needed to sort of get his head back together, get himself dusted off. But I think you're right. I think this is a really, really important season for him, and I think he's got talent, and he's not a bad chap to have in an F1 car at all. But he's by no means Lewis Hamilton Mark II, is he? He's still got some development in him to go, and I think he needs to be by the end of But I think a good season for him at the end of this year would be like, whoever you're going to give me, I'll be the leader of this team, and they've got to match me, right? Because I'm setting such a high level. And I think last year he kind of lost his way a bit, whereas in his first year he did a bit better. But like you said, I think it said that you made a good point. Like with the development of the car, he might get to sway it back to what he likes more than because it's different to what Lewis likes, and that could come to benefit him. I mean, we'll talk about his potential teammates after the break because that again is a question I don't think it's really been discussed today because I think so much of the Formula One world has just been stuck in awe at what's happened and the developments. I'll ask you now to get your crystal ball out How do you think it will go for Lewis at Ferrari? I see. Look, I almost said Mercedes there. It's still so hard to say Lewis and Mercedes. It's going to take some getting used to. How do you think it will get on? He'll get on at the Scuderia.
I have a huge amount of faith in him as a person, and Ferrari, for all of the memes and banter they've suffered the last couple of years, they have improved. They've won races. They were super competitive year before last. They were the only team other than Red Bull to win a race last year, and they've definitely moved in the right direction. So it feels like they're on an upward trajectory. So if you're going to move to Ferrari, now is a good time. Crystal ball. I mean, yeah.
Don't worry, I won't hold you to these predictions because it's not possible to predict.
So I think they'll win races, and a fair few of them. I don't think he'll win more than, I don't know, 5, 10, somewhere between 5 and 10 in a season, let's say in 2025. But I think he will win races because Ferrari should be more competitive in 2025. It's the last year of this regulation set where they really should have caught up to Red Bull. I think he'll beat Charles Leclerc over the course of the season. But I think it'll be closer than he's had it with George last year. Yeah, I think it will go well, but it's hard. It's really hard to see any. Sorry, I know we're getting really into like initial prediction territory, but it's really hard to see anybody other than Red Bull winning a championship at the moment.
Yeah,
so
no, I don't disagree with you.
I think races definitely. Championship feels like a bit of a long shot, but you never know. He's brilliant. Ferrari could pull a masterclass out of the bag, put a great package together. I did see some really funny stuff on like Twitter. Obviously, it's just been fantastic value today, and in between various meetings with work and stuff, it's been quite fun to look at what's been discussed. But one of my favourites was it was Lewis Hamilton going from hearing Bono say "Lewis, it's hammer time" to hearing "We are checking" on the team radio.
Such an iconic radio, and you know exactly from what team and who's doing that when you just say those 3 words.
Yeah, really tickled me, that did. But yeah, I'm gonna go out there and say I think it will go well. I think it will prove successful. Whether or not it's enough for Lewis to win another championship, I'm less confident. How about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like this season is Red Bull's to lose, right? So then next season, I'd hope by that point the gap between Red Bull and the competition is much tighter, and because they know so much more about the regulations. So I'm hoping, like you say, next year, his first season in Scuderia in Ferrari, like he can just get get up to speed, win a few races, and then set himself a good platform for 2026 when the engine regulations change. And I think Lewis has got a sixth sense sometimes about judging when to move before a regulation change. He did that with McLaren and leaving for Mercedes. I feel like he must have been shown or told something to think that this is not a bad step to go and move to them for 2026. And so if he can be in position for 2026 where Ferrari come out the strongest, I think that'd be great, and I think I'd absolutely love that.
Obviously, in his 40s though.
I know, and that's
crazy.
That was something I was going to come on to in a minute. His age. On Charles, I think they will get on well with each other. I think they'll fight so hard against each other. I think the battling between the two of them, we've seen Charles really go up against Max and really hand it to Max sometimes. So I don't think we've seen Charles and Lewis fight too often. I'd have to go look through YouTube clips to go to find that. Nothing springs to mind. I suppose for Charles though, he's done it before. He's beaten a multiple world time champion in as a teammate at Ferrari. Like he knows that, and he'll have been in the team for several years. Mm-hmm. He may have got a bit complacent. I'm not sure, but what a challenge for him to come in and face, turn up to work and your new teammate is Lewis. Like I think Charles will be so fired up, and I think they are such a strong pairing. I think, I'll say it now. I think I'd be shocked if there's a stronger lineup on the grid in that season. I think that is probably the best two you could get. I mean, I think the only other one I could maybe consider would be Verstappen and Lando Norris, but Leclerc is, I think, a better driver than Lando Norris. He's won more races, and just looks quicker as well. So yeah, I think 2025 might be a season of just getting your feet under the table, figuring out what goes on, winning a few races, and then just setting himself up for a big 2026. I think that's That's the realist in me, but who knows? We could go from preseason testing. We find that Ferrari are right on the Red Bull's tails, and there's not that much big of a gap. I mean, there were mad Twitter rumors before all this kicked off that Ferrari had found some crazy amount of performance in their engine, something silly, and I thought, well, that's probably just someone sat at home on a computer just typing random numbers and saying that's what they've heard. I'm not sure how they'd know that, but who knows? Who knows? I mean, but again, that's the thing. This season sets up next season so well that we will be following Ferrari so closely for their performance and the development to see where that car ends the season, where it starts from. But also from a Ferrari point of view, I don't think we've touched on yet. It's like from a strategy point of view, they've been a joke for the last 5 years, 6 years.
Yeah.
Like there've been memes galore of them being clowns and being all over the place. Like we didn't really see a massive improvement last year, and I'm kind of thinking that's probably because Fred Vasseur was only brought in just before just before the season started. He didn't have a full winter, so I'm hoping he can make those changes as well. But also, Ferrari do have reliability problems, and I think that's one of the things that held back their season last year is the lack of reliability. So if they can fix the strategy team and the reliability this season, I think that'd be a very good season from a how can we get this team ready for Lewis.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just a really powerful message as well, isn't it? I think for Ferrari from a leadership perspective to demonstrate how serious they are. Because I think I really like Leclerc, obviously, and I do rate Sainz pretty highly, not as highly as some, but pretty highly. But neither of them are the kind of, particularly Charles. They're both quite nice, and Charles Leclerc in particular is very nice, and I think that's a really admirable quality in someone who's so competitive in a really highly intense sport. But I do think that probably comes at some cost sometimes. So I think things like strategies and stuff like that, like it's going to be really interesting to see the dynamic because Lewis is much more. I want to find a nice way of saying it, but I suppose ruthless. He's a much more ruthless competitor, I think, and like not afraid to communicate what he wants and disagree with the team. That's going to be a really interesting dynamic, I think, and maybe something that Charles will potentially learn from him a little bit as well. I think that's the other thing for Charles, thinking about this in his shoes. Yes, he'll be a bit nervous, of course, but as you say, his track record itself is pretty good. He's incredibly highly rated by Ferrari, been signed on a really long-term deal. And he'll have the opportunity to learn from the best driver ever. So I think from his perspective, it's going to be a sort of an interesting, enjoyable challenge, I guess, right up until the point that they're both fighting for a race win. And then we'll see. Because as you say, Charles is incredibly aggressive on track. Although I think he's a very fair driver in reality. Like he's quite aggressive and he'll chuck the car in for quite late for an overtake, as we saw on Perez towards the end of last season. But in general, I don't remember him driving into the side of anybody too often.
No.
And the same goes for Lewis. So I think if you're going to pick two drivers on the grid who are going to go wheel to wheel but be respectful, I don't think you can go far wrong with those two.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point about him learning from him. I think it'd be stupid not to seek his counsel and his guidance. And I think the team as well, I think it's a bit like when Schumacher turned up, he sort of molded the team into what he wanted it to be and learn from them. And like when Lewis went from McLaren to Mercedes, he really helped the team get up to speed. And we heard Vettel was very good at doing that at Ferrari and Aston Martin as well. So I think that as well. I suppose someone you say about Lewis being quite direct and ruthless. Carlos Sainz, who's just been sacked basically for 2025, well, not been sacked, but not been renewed for 2025. Like he was quite good at doing that, telling Ferrari, "No, this is the strategy we're doing," or "No, this is what I'm doing." So it'll be interesting to see what those dynamics are. But yeah, please do not make us sit through rogue Ferrari strategy calls when you've got two amazing drivers. I think that will literally drive Formula One fans. I think all Formula One fans round the bend. I don't think there's the only people that would be laughing at that and enjoying that would be Christian Horner and Jos Verstappen. I think everyone else would find that quite frustrating because ultimately, right, for Formula One as a sport, this is a great thing to have your star man move across to the most historic team. And I think for the sport, it kind of needs a happy ending, right? It needs it to go well. And has the script kind of been written already? Are we going to see Lewis winning his 8 at Ferrari, beating Schumacher's record? Because they're obviously equal at the moment at Ferrari. And someone else was saying, I mean, this is just people just getting excited on Twitter saying like, Adrian Newey said he only needs a reason to move to Ferrari. I don't know when his deal is up, but could you imagine if he joined as well? I mean, I think Red Bull would pay him zillions of pounds to stay there. I think they'd do anything but to let him go. But
yeah,
that's being a bit too crystal bally. But there is a great script there to happen, right? Where Lewis wins his 8th at Ferrari. Like it's just, especially over the last couple of years, it'd be a great moment in the biopic of his life.
Yeah, and I think it would be a very nice little. I mean, winning the 8th or whatever would be remarkable of itself, but a nice little moniker to separate him from Alonso and Vettel, who both made a similar move with similar aspirations and both got pretty close. To be fair, they both did get close, but both got beat by.
It'd be another way of cementing his sort of greatness, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
To go to three separate teams in the modern era of Formula One, like that's something we saw probably more frequently in the past. But to go to 3 separate teams in the modern era and become a world champion at all of them would, and to be the most of all time would just be, that would make. I think for me that would make up for the injustice of Abu Dhabi. I think.
Yeah,
if that's how he got his 8th, I mean just the thought of that. The script is there. Come on, someone please, Ferrari, the gods, whoever controls it, just write that script and let that happen, because I think it's too good to be true, right? I feel like it has to be happen, but yeah, I mean, you touched on it briefly. We should talk about his age.
Yep,
he's 39. He doesn't look 39. He looks in very good shape, and he looks very youthful for a 39-year-old. I hope I look as youthful as that and as fit as that when I'm 39. It's still a few years away from me. I suppose we've not really seen him slow down. I suppose what we have seen him in the last year or two is just be a bit more cautious sometimes when he's dueling with people. Now, that might partly because him going, you know what, I'm in a slow car and, there's no point going out crazy for this. And I don't see it in reaction times because it's not really that. I think,
no, definitely
the incident in Qatar, that was a one-off, and that was kind of 6 of one and a half dozen of the other. And also, the reason why I'm not too worried about his age was it was only, 2 years ago when it was, or 3 years ago now, when he fought, he fought for his title battle from the very first to the very last second of a season and really fought for it and really pushed it. And so I'd be surprised if there's a massive drop-off. But are you worried about his age? Do you think he could start slowing down?
No. I think Alonso is a good example, right? He is older than Lewis Hamilton. He's still, I don't think he's necessarily at the absolute peak of his game, but he is still a top driver, very highly rated, and he probably is on the list of potential replacements for Lewis, for my money. Maybe. No, I'm not super worried about his age. I mean, it would be remarkable for him to win a world championship in his 40s. But as you say, he is an absolute specimen, and he's lost none of his. I mean, he obviously lost a bit of his drive, I think, in 2022, 3. Where are we now? 2022. Yeah. I think it was quite obvious that the recovery after Abu Dhabi 21 was a long one, and we saw a bit of a drop off in performance. But based on what we saw last year, the consistency he had, the fact that he regularly out-qualified George Russell, who is a really fast Saturday driver. Everybody is aware of that. He put the car on pole in Hungary. My God, I mean, I don't even know how he did that. He's still got it 100%. And I don't see any reason why an extra year or an extra year and a half too would make any difference to him right now. Like, realistically, what is the difference between 39 and 40, 41? Like, it's not massive. And in his case in particular, I mean, fine, if we're having this conversation 15, 20 years ago and we're talking about a previous generation of driver, maybe it'd be a bit different. But these days, no, I just don't worry. The guy lives like a monk as well. I mean, it's just not, it doesn't seem likely that there's going to be much of a drop off there. And I might just agree with you about the aggression, but we did, I don't know, I saw there were definitely a few moves last year where I remember texting you being like, that's the old Lewis right there. Like that's 21 Lewis, right? That's not,
still got it.
That's not the 22 kind of sad, slightly mopey Lewis who's still really pissed off basically about Abu Dhabi and driving a car that was actively trying to break his bones. I think we definitely saw that again last year, and I'm not worried about it. I think it's a factor. I think, sure, and everybody will be having a conversation. Everyone will be like, when are you going to retire Lewis or whatever? By the time he gets to Ferrari, but equally, I think everyone's going to be so excited about the fact he's going to be at Ferrari. Who no one's going to care how old he is.
Yeah, I mean, if it reassures you, I've just googled the oldest F1 champion, and Fangio was 46 when he was the oldest F1 champion in 1957. So if Fangio could do it back then, I mean, it was a lot less races, but if Fangio can do it back then, I'm sure Lewis can still go for a few more years. So yeah. I should just be full disclosure right now. I am a massive Lewis Hamilton fan, first and foremost, more than a Mercedes fan, and I will be buying a lot of Hamilton Ferrari merch as soon as it hits the stores next year. I'll be buying the cap, the T-shirt, the coat. I don't know. I pray to God they don't hire some absolutely nutter designer that they've had for some of their merch in the past, because the merch has been getting better, and their design of their team wear and their car liveries has been getting better last year. But I'm sure they'll be paying a lot of money for someone very good to design them some good stuff, because they were probably looking at the announcement today thinking, well, we know Lewis has got a big fan base, and they will be cashing it in. So I will be in that queue buying that first Ferrari Lewis Hamilton cap. I'll have to find somewhere. I'll have to find somewhere for my Mercedes stash. Maybe I could put that in a nice memory box or something to put back the bed. I've got the McLaren stuff from a kid when I was younger at home, but
yeah, very good. No, this has come at an interesting time for me, because I've been looking at, so like last season, I'm quite attached to Oscar Piastri as a driver. I really like him, and I will definitely follow him over the next. But
you're allergic to papayas.
I am allergic to papaya, as you well know. But I like McLaren. I've got a soft spot for them as a team, and I've had a soft spot for Ferrari for a long time, and I do really like Charles Leclerc as well. So this is now that this has gone to another level. Now I've gone from sort of I've got a bit of a soft spot for Ferrari. I'd like to see them back near the top again, and being desperate to see Oscar Piastri win races and do well and stuff over the next decade. To I'm all in on 2025 now. I'm quite excited for the season to see how it goes, of course, but Hamilton and Leclerc driving for Ferrari together in 2025 is just going to be it for me, I think, for that year, and maybe for 26 if he stays for the next year afterwards for the new regs. It's hard to imagine I'm going to give a flying about any other driver or any other team while we're living through that little period. So I'm just readying myself for that obsession. And equally, I'll be very excited about merch. We're going to see the 44 on a Ferrari. Will
I know. Unless he wins the World Championship this year, then we will see a red one. We'll see a one on the.
Does he take the one? Does he?
I don't. He's not in the past. He's not. He's done it sometimes in the past, but he's not. He didn't do it for the last couple of World Championships. But I feel like he will want to rip that number off Max Verstappen's car if he wins it this year.
I think he's got to switch to the yellow helmet as well. I think a yellow helmet in that Ferrari will pop.
Oh yes, return back to the yellow helmet. A tribute to Senna as well. Oh yeah. I think because the neon goes quite well with the Mercedes at the moment, but the yellow helmet. I've not even thought about that. Oh, that's got me excited just thinking about a yellow helmet. That's how excited I am for this. I mean, I feel like that first race of the 2025 season, you and I will be sat next to each other, fully decked out in our full Ferrari Hamilton gear. Like, I feel like we're just going to fully embrace this. So yeah, fair enough. And I feel like we should test out our new end before we go to our break, or our thing we'll be saying quite regularly. You came up with it earlier. I'll give it to you now.
Forza Luigi.
Very good. And with that, we'll take a quick pit stop. Hello, welcome back from the break. Hope you had a jolly old time. Now, first time we discussed all things Lewis moving to Ferrari, what it means for this year, what it means for his time in Ferrari, and our initial reaction to it. Now let's talk about what it means for one man in particular, but also for the man that's going to fill the seat next to George Russell at Mercedes. Mm-hmm. So let's start with one man that's been caught up in all this, Carlos Sainz. How do you think he'll be feeling right now?
As an innocent bystander, yeah. Of everyone this is going to affect, I think it's probably going to impact him the most negatively. Not just because he's lost his seat at Ferrari. I mean, he may well get the seat at Mercedes. I think he would be a very safe pair of hands to give the drive to. So, maybe he'll make that trade and he'll be happy to do so. He's driven for plenty of teams in Formula One already. Why not add another one to the list? But it's more that he's got to endure 12 months now, or 10 months of Lewis Hamilton Ferrari mania, and every little mistake or anything like that is going to be under the microscope for him. And if I really hope we don't, but if we end up in a situation where the season goes like the last one did, and let's say for argument's sake Max Verstappen wins in Bahrain by 30 seconds, we're going to find conversations very quickly move on to, exciting for 2025 and for Hamilton to be at Ferrari. And yeah, it's a long time to be driving for a team when everybody's just talking about the guy who's coming in to replace you. So that could be quite tough for him. But he seems like a pretty tough guy. He's very robust, I think. And he is of himself a very good driver. So I don't know. I wouldn't be super worried, but I think, it's going to be quite a tough year for him.
Yeah, definitely. I think, for him, he wouldn't have wanted his Ferrari dream to have ended like this. I think he would have wanted it to be on his terms, whereas kind of the decision's kind of been taken out of his hand. And I know he was negotiating a new contract with them, but I think he wanted a longer deal than what they were willing. And there were rumors coming out in this last year. I think that Audi were keen to tap up, as they've just taken over Sauber or Stake, whatever they're called now. And I think his team came out and said, yeah, no, he's not interested in that at all. He's very much keen to sort of be at Ferrari for a long time, and for that decision to be taken away from him when he's actually done a pretty good job, really. I think he had a very good year last year. Like he was the only one that wasn't a Red Bull to win a race, and that was from him alone in his skill. Like how much did we praise him in that episode about his sort of his signs masterclass? So I think he's a really he'll be sought after. I think there'll be a lot of teams be interested in him. But I think it'll be hard for him to get over the fact that the decision's been taken for him by them getting someone in better than him, which I think he'll find quite tough. I mean, I did see quite a funny meme of someone saying Sainz will just be like crashing into loads of cars, like as that be his 2024, which I don't see him as well. But I think Sainz will be the kind of guy that uses this to fuel him, and he will just be very, very fired up to let his talking be shown on the track, and he'll use that to advertise himself to top teams. And I think he'll feel gutted. I think it'll be hard for him as well, especially the trajectory he was on. But he was at Red Bull, he left, he went to Renault, was okay there, and then McLaren was a real star there, and then that obviously got him his seat at Ferrari. Like you could see him going to Mercedes or dropping a bit further down and being still doing really well there. I don't see it being breaking him and it being the end of his. It's not like Vettel, where Vettel was kind of a bit broken by the time he went to Aston Martin. I think he will still be a real talent. Do you think Toto Wolff will just do a straight swap? Do you think that'll be where they initially think, or do you think they're likely to go elsewhere? How just if you're Toto Wolff, what are the pros and cons for Carlos Sainz?
I suppose the pros are he's a relatively safe pair of hands. He's a well-experienced Grand Prix driver. He's won races now. And I think he'd be quite a good partner for Russell, probably. The downsides, he's not Lewis. He's probably not realistically close to a kind of Lewis category championship winning driver. He's very good, but I just don't see him in that top bracket. Not yet anyway. And that is probably what Mercedes should be targeting. But as I say, there just aren't many available at all, if any. So maybe Sainz is the best option for them for a couple of years, and until they can find another world beater, maybe, and someone else becomes available, or George develops into that driver. It's quite possible he does. So I think there are a lot of things to weigh up there for Toto. If it was me, I'd probably do it. It's between him and a couple of others. I think he's probably the safest bet, realistically, driving for a top team. He's also got experience driving for a top team, right? He's been at Ferrari a little while. He's driven for McLaren as well. It's not like you'd be plucking someone
Red
from
Bull as well.
Yeah, you're not plucking someone from like Williams after a couple of years and popping them in the Mercedes. Sort of similar to how they did with George Russell. If anything, it's probably a safer move for them than when they took Russell off of Williams. So, albeit Russell got a bit of a cameo, didn't he, driving the Mercedes at what race was that? I can't remember. Bahrain. Yeah, he should have won it, didn't he? Never mind. Yes, I think it's going to be a tough year for him, but as you say, I think he'll be very driven. He's quite I think he's quite a feisty kind of fiery character. I think he'll use it to energize him, and yeah, I'm pretty confident he'll get a good seat, sort of regardless of what happens. But it would make a lot of sense for them to just do a swap.
Yeah, and if you're Toto Wolff, is the criteria for Lewis's replacement, who is the best driver I can get, or do you think it's, well, let me see where George is at. Let me see what level George is at. Is George our new star man, and we get someone to bring up? Like, I think for him that probably has to be the question: is do we just go out for the best person that's available, or do we just get someone that will fit in the team culture, or do we use that second seat to bring someone up that's going to be, that's undervalued or underappreciated, that's actually real star quality? Like, I'm sure those, for me, those seem to be like the three sort of questions he'll be sort of trying to answer in deciding who replaces Hamilton.
Yeah, it's a lot depends on George, doesn't it? I think if they've got a huge amount of faith in George and they can build the team around him in exactly the same way they have Lewis this last 8-9 years, maybe they will think that they can, I don't want to say settle, but maybe they will think getting a driver that isn't sort of a guaranteed winner or a likely guaranteed winner is probably okay. Yeah, it all depends on their assessment of George, but they do rate George very highly, and he is a very good driver, and he's very young. He's only been with Mercedes 2 full seasons, and he beat Lewis in one of them, albeit there are mitigating circumstances. And then the second one, he was beaten well, but it wasn't like he got absolutely thrashed like Alonso and Stroll or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. A lot depends on how they rate George, and I think of the drivers that are seemingly likely to be available, Sainz is probably the best one. They could take Albon. I'd say they're relatively close, but I still have Sainz, I think, ahead of Albon personally.
Yeah.
What do you think about them, those two?
Yeah. Well, just on that, I think on the George one, like I think you're right. They've always rated George because they would never have put him into the seat in the first place, right? They've obviously had a development plan for him, this or that, but it's whether him being, the leader at this point now is too early in his career. Now, did they think they were going to get 2 more years out of Lewis, and then that'd be the time that George would be fully developed and ready to go to be the main guy? Like, he's still very young. So I think, it's interesting to see. I think it's a big season for George, really, to show what level he's at to Toto. Albon, I mean, what season he had last year, I think we both really highlighted in our end of season year review, really impressed us, really dragged that Williams up the field, something that Lewis has been very good at. Not saying that there's similar sort of level, but he did really outperform that car, and his just driving was just impressive. His speed, his pace, but also his overtaking and defending. Like, I was very, very impressed. I think he's gone up in value for a lot of drivers. I also really like his temperament as well. I think he's a really sound bloke. I think he comes across very level-headed, not too showy, not too argumentative, but is willing to get his elbows out and really fight people. And I think as well, the experience that he had at Red Bull, he's massively learned from. And I think he would really relish the opportunity to step up another level and be in one of the top teams. I think he'd be quite a safe bet, but I think it'd be hard to pick between him and Sainz. I think Sainz has just got a bit more of an edge because he's a bit more ready to go to be in a top team, whereas that's kind of a bit slightly untested, really, with Albon, because Albon didn't really get a fair crack of the whip at Red Bull. So yeah, I could see either way, really. I think they're both. I think those two are probably the front runners in my opinion. I think those would be the two I'd be looking at the closest. And originally, I suppose a name that has been thrown out as well, and I really don't believe this. This is just complete Twitter nonsense. People saying Toto's already been in contact with Fernando Alonso's management team. Like, no, he's not. No, Toto Wolff has not been. The first thing he's done is not picking up the phone to Fernando Alonso's management when he's trying to, before this is even breaking. That's just people just trying to grab headlines. Like, if Toto has done that, then he needs to go and see someone, because that's not logical. It's your first step to go pick up the phone to a 42-year-old's management team that's burned and crashed at every team he's been at. Like, I feel like, yes, him and George are getting well, but I feel like Alonso is such a bad decision for that Mercedes seat. Like, am I wrong? Do you see are there pros of him going?
He's not just a 42-year-old Grand Prix winner. Well, he's the lizard killer.
I thought you were going to say 2-time world champion.
He also happens to be a 2-time world champion, but primarily, and certainly for us on this podcast, he is the lizard killer. And
For context for new listeners, you may remember this at Singapore at free practice. Fernando Alonso did run over a lizard, and people thought he did it deliberately because he managed to avoid the drain covers at Vegas. So he was then dubbed the lizard killer, and that was one of our highlights of last season. But yeah,
the reaction times are still there. That's all I'm saying. Yes, it's a very outside shout, and you're right. He is everything Mercedes doesn't value in a personality. He's incredibly combustible. He's prickly. If you end up doing him or making mistakes, he makes you pay for them probably more than any other driver publicly. But he's a tremendous competitor. He's still got it. He's rapid still. He absolutely smashed his teammate. Now, I know that's not saying much because his teammate's Lance Stroll. Sorry, Lance Stroll, once again, for brutalising you on the podcast. And
I've missed this. Your lack of appreciation for Lance Stroll.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Do you know what? There's a Lance Stroll related discussion I'd like to have when we come to talk about the Andretti decision next week, but we'll save that. Alonso, I think of all the drivers available, I think he's probably the fastest one.
Wow, that is a bold claim. I'd put Sainz quicker than him.
You think
in the same car? I think Sainz is quicker.
I don't know. I think it's close, but I'd probably have Alonso personally.
I mean, fair play to Alonso as being a 42-year-old to even be in the conversation.
Yeah,
that is, he's obviously got some talent. But could you I think that's a massive point about his personality. Like, if you make a mistake, he punishes you publicly. Like, let's say he comes in next season and the car is terrible, he would slaughter Mercedes publicly from day one, like to a level that we've not seen since he was at McLaren. Like, he would be so brutal, and even Alpine actually was pretty brutal about them as well. But like, he'd be so public and brutal, and he wouldn't be discreet at all. It'd be so obviously timed, and I think, you could see him and Toto Wolff having a proper punch up, couldn't you? Because he just wouldn't accept that kind of behaviour. But I do see he's quick.
He is fast. I just think he could win races for them. I genuinely believe that.
Yeah.
I think, same with Sainz, but I don't know.
And also, if you bring him in, does he just do the role that Lewis is kind of doing? He wins you points. He maximises the car.
Yep. At
the same time, he's sort of protecting George while George is developing and growing into the driver he's going to become.
Yep.
And George and Alonso do get on well, but that's they have a relationship, I think, quite probably outside of races. You can see them being quite hot-headed with each other when they're dueling with one another.
I mean, it would be like, we've already had one Twitter meltdown this week. Well, two actually, if you throw the Andretti stuff into the mix. But I think there'd be another one if Alonso went to Mercedes. I think it'd be the most amazing move for him. I think he'd be moving to a team that could potentially win races in 2025, competing with another really good driver. I think there are. Yeah, I agree. There are a lot of reasons not to do it, but I don't think pace is one of them. So
no, I think this would probably be Alonso's biggest shock move, because he obviously disappeared from the sport and then came back, and that was kind of, we always, no one ever really fully believed him when he said he was retiring the first time. I mean, his move to Aston came out of nowhere, and that was big at the time, and then obviously the subsequent drama with Piastri and all that as well. But I feel like this would be big if he was, anointed as the Hamilton successor, especially when Hamilton schooled him as well. Like, that would be. That's the thing with Alonso. I always find Alonso, he seems to me so much older than Hamilton. He seems like he's like, when we said earlier about how youthful Hamilton is, like, I feel that there's more than 3 years between the two of them. I think I don't know why. Are there any other contenders? I mean, we know who would have been in the contention for a seat, but is not because of their new contracts. Yeah. Are you kind of happy that Piastri and Lando Norris are sort of tied up in long contracts, or do you wish they were kind of on the market because of the prospects of them being at Mercedes?
I kind of wish Norris was. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad Piastri's staying with McLaren, but I think Norris has been in the sport long enough now that I really want to see him tested against a top driver, another top driver.
Well, he doesn't want to. He
Well,
said when he
no.
signed his new contract, he said, "Yeah, why would you want to go to Red Bull and face Max Verstappen?"
Yeah, that's a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I really hope that's not his mentality, and that would explain why. Sorry, Lando. That would explain why he hasn't won a race yet. But I would like. It would have been nice for Lando to have been made available. I think, or been available, because I think him and George Russell would be a really potent pair, and it would be
Yeah,
fascinating to see them in particular sort of going head to head, because they are the two next, along with Charles Leclerc, probably in the bracket that we
yeah,
sort of think
yeah.
about in terms of potentially challenging Max at some point. So, yeah, that's a bit of a shame. Yeah, Zach Brown must be loving life. Just being like, yeah, 2 drivers, long-term contracts. See ya, no problem.
I mean, I'd love to know what the buyout figure would be if Toto phoned up Zach saying, just out of interest, how much would it cost me to pay to get Norris or Piastri? Like, it must be
Tens of
mega
millions.
because
Yeah.
yeah, mega. And if you know, I'd be shocked if they went down that route of let's break the bank to get one of those two because I think they are, very hot property. But the fair play to they say Zach Brown's played a blinder by getting them before this is all kicked off. I think that's a really, really smart move, and I think he'll be very happy that he's got those two, and it's a real voting confidence for him from both drivers to secure their futures. Because they're just not a factor now, are they? Really, in silly season, that team is kind of locked down already, and so is Mercedes now. So is Ferrari now. That those are two big teams that are, exactly how it's gonna be.
Could Sainz replace Checo?
That is a very, very good question. I think that kind of depends how Checo does in 2024, because I think it's quite likely that someone like Daniel Ricciardo could be Max's teammate either at some point this season or for next season. So that might take it out of his hands. I think it all hinges on Checo. I know that Sainz and Verstappen don't get on very well with each other. I think that was one of the reasons why Sainz ended up leaving the Red Bull family, because they clashed as teammates. So I think Verstappen would fight that quite hard if Horner phoned him up and said, "Oh, by the way, I'm bringing Carlos back into the fold." But then we have seen Red Bull have brought back in Daniel Ricciardo before, and that worked for him. But I think Daniel Ricciardo was a very different, package when he was signed as the test driver to where Carlos Sainz will be leaving Ferrari unless he has a shock of a year. I don't know, but what do you think? Do you think he could go?
Crossed my mind, yeah.
I mean, it would be very good from a silly season point of view, because that would be another move across, and then there's still the Mercedes gap, and then that's still going to generate moves elsewhere, right?
Yeah. The only reason that it crossed my mind is obviously Sainz is well known to the Red Bull organization. I think he was relatively well rated before we moved on. I agree with you about the Max relationship thing, but equally Max is just in a different world now. Like he's so much faster and dominant and winning races all the time and winning 3 championships in a row. I just don't think he'd look at Sainz as any kind of a threat, but maybe he'd look at him as a more consistent performer than Checo, as kind of a rear gunner and a second driver. And I think Red Bull probably would look at him like that as well. Checo was incredibly unreliable for a lot of last season, and that sort of thing you just never see from Sainz. You don't see a weekend like that from Sainz. You never see him qualify like 15th or 16th. He's always in the top 10. He regularly just puts the car in the points and finishes well. And I think in a Red Bull, he'd probably end up on the podium more often than not if they perform as well as they have done this last couple of years. He'd be a consistent performer, but I don't think he'd get close to beating Max, which is kind of perfect, right? It's what you'd want. So
yeah, and he's probably a better pick than Daniel Ricciardo.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that would be very good from a silly season point of view. Like, I would be a bit gutted if it kind of fizzled out and like the only change was Lewis going one way and Carlos going the other, and then everyone else sort of locking down. I'll be surprised if that is. I think we are in for a shake up of some sorts.
Yeah. So I don't think Red Bull will retain Checo beyond this season anyway. No. I think they'll be looking for a new driver in 25, regardless. And now they know there's a good one available, so they could go and get him.
Yeah. On the Mercedes seat, are there any other wild cards you want to discuss? Any other wild thoughts you've got? I mean, I think you and I are both in agreement that Sainz, Albon are kind of the front runners. Alonso's kind of in the conversation, but he's probably a bit more of a risk than the other two. we've said Piastri and Norris are not in contention because of their deals. Anyone you think might be has an outside chance? Anything a bit left field?
So I've got my pet theory about a former 4-time world champion coming back to the sport.
You did. Who did you think he was coming back for? Audi, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that might change now?
I mean, maybe. I mean, if German teams do like having German drivers, historically they have liked that a lot. I know Audi take the mickey out of Mercedes a lot because they're largely based in the United Kingdom, whereas Audi are based in Germany still. And yeah, maybe that'll swing it. And I don't know, Sebastian Vettel, who knows? But so many drivers leave and then come back again. And Lewis did seem convinced he'd returned, didn't he? Wasn't he when he retired? So yeah, I do wonder. The pull of Toto Wolff, the prospect of driving for Mercedes, the prospect of potentially challenging for wins. I don't know if Sebastian Vettel's still got that in him potentially, but I don't know. I think it's more likely than some suggestions maybe that are out there.
Yeah, well, we'll come on to some other wild suggestions. I mean, I think it's a nice romantic view of Vettel coming back to the sport and being sort of the saviour for Mercedes at that time. I think you're right. He's 4 world time champion. I think my biggest reservation about Vettel is the driver that left the sport in those last couple of years was a shell of the driver at his peak, and he is not. If you compare him to Sainz, Albon, or Alonso, I'd pick all 3 of them over him every day of the week for that seat. I just think, especially a year or so out of the sport, there would be a lot of pressure on him to come straight away and be lightning quick and get it. And I think he just lost something, and he may have rediscovered that in his time away from Formula One. But he's 40 odd now, right? So he's not in the prime of his life. I think that'd be a bit of a backward. That would be a bit of a left field. It is a wild card, but that'd be a very left field kind of. It would almost feel a bit desperate, really. I think there are much better options available, but it is nice romantic, so I'll give you that.
Yeah, and yeah, he is. I'm sure he's a very committed beekeeper these days, so maybe that's what's keeping him from the sport. But yeah, I don't know. Why not? One last hurrah, drive for Mercedes for a year or 2 could happen.
I've got a very wild card suggestion.
Go on,
Kim Antonelli. Now, some listeners may have no idea who Kim Antonelli is. He is in the Mercedes Young Driver Program, and he has gone straight from Formula 3 straight into Formula 2, and people are tipping him for the very top of motorsport. And there have been some people suggesting, if he has a good F2 year, could Mercedes take a punt on him and make him George's teammate? I mean, I'm going to put my hands up now. I've never seen Antonelli race. I know limited about him, but he must be very talented to go straight from F3 into F2 without being the world champion. I'm pretty sure he wasn't world champion, but he's gone straight into F2. I think this is a big thing, and he's been obviously backed by Mercedes. I mean, I might keep an eye on the F2 standings for the next couple of races just to see how he does, because if he is the next, he could be like when Charles Leclerc broke into F2 and he was just incredible and he won it in his first year. He could be that level of talent. We don't know. I don't know. But could we see Mercedes take a punt on a rookie and do what they did, similar to what McLaren did with Hamilton, put a rookie in a top team in a key moment? I think it's a nice idea, but I just don't see Mercedes taking that risk at this stage when they've just lost. To go from the best to someone completely untested in Formula 1, that is massive. What about you? Do you think there's any chance Antonelli, or do you think it's no chance?
I don't think so. No, I mean, you got to remember when Hamilton was signed, he was considered a generational talent at the time.
Maybe we should do a bit more research on Antonelli and see if he is considered generational.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he's spoken in very high regards from people that watch F3 and other formulas, but I'm not sure there's the same buzz just yet about him as there was Hamilton or Leclerc.
But I think in the same way that George had to do a stint at Williams, I think we'd probably what we're more likely to see is a Williams driver move up to Mercedes, i.e. Albon, Bottas back, lol. Probably Albon. No.
And then you put Antonelli.
Williams in the Logan Sargent seat as it becomes available.
Yeah. Do you think there's a chance that we could see Mercedes reserve driver Mr. Mick Schumacher? Could he be in for a shout, or do you think that his days in F1 are done?
Unless his simulator times have been absolutely spellbinding, no. Surely
But
not.
then I think if his simulated times were spellbinding, he'd be racing Formula One this season,
Yeah.
and he's not. He's in world endurance car racing
Yeah.
for Alpine actually. So bit of a left field loan agreement there. But
It seems incredibly
yeah,
unlikely, doesn't it, at this point?
yeah, it'd be almost a bit desperate. I think if he was like, they'd have to be rebuffed from quite a few other people to go for him, which is it's a shame really because there's an alternative reality out there in the world that Schumacher had a great F1 career, and this was the perfect moment for him, and he stepped up and replicated his dad and won races for Mercedes, which his dad wasn't able to do. But yeah, I mean, Esteban Ocon, he's the only other wild card I can think of. He's got a close relationship with Toto Wolff, who was his manager, is still his manager. I always get confused. I forget. He did used to be on the Young Driver program, but I don't know. I can't see Ocon being there. I think he's made too many mistakes, and not pushed on really, and he's also not good at escaping penalties, as we saw him get 3 in one race twice last season.
Yeah.
Do you think he's got a chance or no?
I mean, I do quite like Ocon, but I'm not. I don't know. I think he's in a similar kind of sort of relatively average-ish bracket. I think he's a decent Grand Prix driver, maybe a bit underrated in some quarters, but I don't know, like not over Sainz or Albon. So, and I think both of those should be easily accessible for Mercedes now.
Yeah. When I mean, this is an impossible question, and I know you won't know the answer. How long do you think it will be until we hear who replaces Hamilton? Do you think they'll take their time, or do you think he'll move quite quickly to get something sorted just to get it nipped in the bud?
I think they'll take the first half of the season maybe, and they'll announce it in the summer.
Oh, do you know what would be quite good? If they leaked who they were speaking to or who they're considering, and then if the season is a load of garbage, it's just watching people audition for the Mercedes job.
Yeah.
Oh, imagine Sainz, Albon, Alonso going up against each other for the
And
week
Toto
in, week
Wolff's
out.
just like the Alan Sugar of
Yeah.
Formula One for the season.
He's the Simon Cowell. You're through to Judge's house. Like, oh, wow, yeah. I mean, I think with you, I think this announcement from Hamilton today is so left field. It's so unexpected. I would be surprised if there was a sudden flurry of other driver moves. I feel like it's going to slow down and we'll let the season start. Because, also that's where a lot of drivers and a lot of teams will focus their attention. But yeah, I think it might be summer sort of time we start to see announcements. I mean, I think we're in for a shake up for the lineup. This was the first season. Was it the first season ever we had the same lineup?
Yeah.
That we ended the season with. So we already know that's not going to be the case for next year. But yeah, cool. Well, I think that brings to an end our chat on this amazing day, this historic day on Formula One history, with Lewis Hamilton moving over to Ferrari for 2025. Who would have thought this when we had a planning meeting a couple of days ago? I don't think either of us would have said we'll be recording an emergency podcast on a Thursday evening 2 days later, discussing Lewis Hamilton moving to Ferrari. Ferrari! I'm literally we've been talking about it for an hour or so, but I still can't get over it. That's the thing. I still cannot believe it's happening. I think I won't believe it until he's sat there at preseason testing in his Ferrari come next February.
Yeah. No, I think if it had happened on when we met for our little pod planning meeting, we'd have got home a lot later and a lot more drunk. Yeah, it is incredible, incredibly exciting. It's kind of interesting. It's going to be a really interesting year to see how people cope with waiting, I suppose, because a lot of people will be waiting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing some of the more analysis and the reaction of it over the next couple of days and weeks. But with the car launches, I'm sure we'll hear it being discussed then by people as well, and you'll hear people being interviewed. I really can't wait to hear an in-depth interview with Lewis, Carlos, Charles, Toto. I think they're going to be the most interesting people to hear from, and Fred Vasseur actually as well. I think that's going to be fascinating. Mm-hmm. Let's hope someone does a good read of how Ferrari pulled off the signing of Lewis Hamilton. I'd love all that insider gossip of when the plan was actioned, how they did it. That would be great.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thanks for joining us. Happy New Year to everyone, of course. Thanks for joining us. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you enjoyed it, why don't you share it with a friend? Hopefully they enjoy the podcast more than Carlos Sainz has enjoyed Twitter and other formats of social media today. Speaking of Twitter, Will and I are both on Twitter. Will is at WPoiser and I am at LightsOutSam. And on Instagram, we are at the Lights Out Pod.
Yes, and we're back on Tuesday next week for our season predictions, which is going to be quite a come down from talking about Lewis Hamilton moving to Ferrari, but I'm sure we'll have to switch gears into getting excited for the 2024 season. And I think we'll have had maybe one or two car launches. I think we've got one or two on the Monday. I think we've got one. I think Haas is the first one to go, if my memory serves me correctly.
Which is the one we're all waiting for, of course.
Yeah, Gene Haas, the real invested Formula One. I mean, yeah, we'll see.
Will there be like a commemorative sticker of Gunter Steiner, do you think, on the car?
There'll just be a broken door. Where he said, "How dare!" I need to watch that clip again. How dare you fucking smash my door? And like, oh, so good, so good. Yeah. Well, we'll see where we are on when that episode comes out. We might have seen a new car in a new model, a new livery. Who knows? But yeah, we'll preview the new season and make some predictions before even a wheel has been spun. That's how bold we're being our predictions. And yeah, we hope you've enjoyed this emergency podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed this historic day in Formula One history. And that's all from us. All the best, and goodbye.
Ciao, Forza Luigi.
Forza Luigi.